Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the FPCJ press briefing. It is a great pleasure today to invite Mr. Joji Morishita, Japan's Commissioner to the International Whaling Commission. He will talk about a report released last Friday by Scientific Committee of the IWC on Japan's new proposal for the scientific whale research program in the Antarctic Ocean. This briefing will be conducted in English only. Before we listen to what Mr. Morishita has to say, please don't forget to turn your cell phones to silent mode, please. Then, Mr. Morishita, please.
Thank you very much. Is this on? Okay. Thank you very much, and for this opportunity to explain the result of the Scientific Committee of International Whaling Commission. The report of Scientific Committee of International Whaling Commission was just released on the last weekend on Friday. And naturally, one of the most interesting point of interest to many people is how the Scientific Committee discussed about Japan's new research proposal in Antarctic Ocean. So today, I'd like to explain the general contents of the report as well as the next step for this very important issue. And before going to the actual contents of the report, maybe some kind of recap is necessary to just refresh the memory or to present the context of this issue. The end of March last year, International Court of Justice gave out a judgment about Japan's research activities in Antarctic Ocean, which is called JARPA 2. And the ICJ's judgment is the JARPA 2 is outside the scope of Article 8 of the International Convention for the Regulation of Whaling. And therefore, the ICJ made a decision that Japan should stop that research activity. And this is about lethal sampling of whales. And as a result, Japan stopped its lethal sampling activities in the Antarctic Ocean in the following research season, which is from the end of last year to the beginning of this year, the Australia summer. And we have just conducted the sighting survey of research of whales, and the research vessel came back to Japan the beginning of this year. At the same time, the ICJ decision, I think there is oftentimes misperception or misunderstanding that the ICJ decision actually prohibited all the so-called scientific whaling or lethal sampling, or even I saw some headlines or internet opinions that all the whalings are now prohibited by ICJ. To be exact, the ICJ decision again ordered JARPA 2 to stop because it's outside the scope of the International Convention for the Regulation of Whaling. And in the other part of ICJ judgment, which I explained at this very place about a year ago, we have many interesting observations and interpretations included from our perspective. For example, the ICJ observed that the sustainable use of whale resources is still one of the objectives of this convention or International Whaling Commission. And also, they said that depending on the objective of research activities, use of a lethal method is not unreasonable. And also they said when Japan considers new research activities in Antarctic Ocean, they expect Japan to respect some of the conditions or to be exact, they said reasoning and conclusion of ICJ decision. In other words, they assume or they gave us a possibility of revising our research activities to meet the conditions set by ICJ and resume research activities in Antarctic Ocean. And that's our understanding, and based on that understanding, we have substantially improved our research plan and submitted the new research plan to the International Whaling Commission in November last year. And this submission triggers a review process by the International Whaling Commission. International Whaling Commission or its scientific committee has its own procedure to review a new research plan, and one of the process is to have a panel of outside experts to review the research plan, which was held February this year in Tokyo. And that report, I think also I explained here when the report was publicized in April. And Japan has also responded some of the recommendations from this expert panel, and we have submitted additional result of additional analysis to the scientific committee itself. Well, the scientific committee was held in San Diego, California, in the United States, from 22nd of May to the 3rd of June. And the report I will talk about today is a report of this whole scientific committee. And in its consideration of Japan's new research plan, the scientific committee looked at the report from expert panel, also the responses from Japan, and also general scientific data and information as to the oil resources in the Antarctic Ocean. So, in a sense, the report I think you have in front of you is the summary of all those processes conducted by the scientific committee, and the report itself has, IWC has its rule that the report will be publicized 2 weeks after the closure of the scientific committee, and that was the end of last week. Okay. One more background information, because I'm sure that there will be some questions. The scientific committee's terms of reference or role of reviewing a new research proposal is defined by a legally binding document of the International Whaling Commission. And the scientific committee is to review and comment the new research plan. Review and comment. And the scientific committee, as well as the IWC Commission itself, does not have any jurisdiction or authority to either approve or deny the research plan. The final decision to issue a research permit or to initiate the research itself stays on the contracting government which proposed the research plan, in this case Japan. Of course, we have repeatedly made it clear that we like to conduct our research activities based on a good science, and we respect the good scientific advice and comments from scientific committee as well as other scientific community. And that still stays, and that's why we responded to many of the recommendations from the expert panel, and we will continue to improve our research plan even after the scientific committee meeting. Okay. With this background, I'd like to explain the contents of research in the report of the scientific committee. The scientific committee report itself, as you might already found out, is more than 100 pages long, or something like that. And the pertinent part of the report is section 17.1. And the formula of a report might be a little bit confusing, and also include a lot of technical and scientific terminology. So it might be difficult to understand for a non-scientist, but I try to explain not in the detail, but general sense of a scientific committee report as much as possible today. In one word, the report is describing both pros and cons of Japanese research plan. And there are no definite conclusion, or the report itself is not so conclusive, which is not surprising in IWC, because as we know very well, the IWC is a divided organization. Unfortunately, on one side, there are a group of countries which will not accept sometimes any whaling under any circumstances. On the other side is like Japan, Norway, Iceland, and some other developing countries which support sustainable use of whales as resources, like any other marine living resources. Of course, under scientific quota and appropriate conservation and enforcement measures. So the support of supporting the controlled harvest of whales under international control. Because of this division, even scientific committee is always having a difficulty of coming up some kind of a conclusion or consensus. And as you may find from the past report of a scientific committee, there are many descriptions, like some says this, others says that, and as a result, no conclusion. Or as a result, the scientific committee cannot make any decision. And this time is not the exception in that sense. And as I said, you will find many arguments from both sides. Let me explain some of the major points in the scientific committee report. After the February expert panel meeting, Japan put the highest priority in answering some of the most important questions, scientific questions raised by the expert. One is to conduct more quantitative analysis on the need of lethal study or lethal sampling method. And that involved a lot of computer simulations. And we did submit the result to the scientific committee. Another one is also extensive computer simulation and computer analysis on the appropriateness or the sample size proposed by Japan in this new research plan. The sample size proposed as 333 minke whales in the Antarctic Ocean. And to try to provide more information whether this is scientifically and statistically appropriate and achieve the objectives we have included in the research plan. Some of the recommendations posed by the expert panel were not completed. And in a sense, some of them, in our interpretation, don't need to be completed before the start of research itself. Again, there are some differences of opinion about these interpretations too, like any other issues. About the contents or about some of the major conclusion of a scientific committee. From positive side, they agreed that Japan's additional scientific work is significant and useful. Also, as to the issue of the need of lethal sampling, especially in this case, the data about age, the scientific committee observed that the additional analysis conducted by Japan has indicated that that will reduce the uncertainties in the scientific consideration of stock status. To be particular, they are talking about recruitment rate, and if you like to hear some details about what recruitment rate means, I'm happy to answer that. But the point is, the recruitment rate is one of the indicators of the increasing or power for whales to increase or regenerate. And our research activities are now regarded by the scientific committee that the result will reduce the uncertainty in this term. Also about sampling or size of samples, the scientific committee observed that we follow the approach recommended or put forward by the expert panel, so that our additional analysis is in line with the recommendations from our expert panel. But the result of that analysis, as I said, has both pros and cons. They said, the scientific committee said, there are still remaining need of analysis, and as a result, they cannot make any conclusive observations about research itself. Well, if they said that they can support the Japanese research activities 100%, we'll be very surprised anyway, because it's a scientific committee or IWC. Also, they said the Japan could not indicate whether our research activities or result of our research activities will bring about a substantial improvement in the conservation and management of whales. The problem from our point of view is we have no criteria or interpretation or definition of substantial improvement. And when I talk to the Japanese press people, I use the example of entrance examination to a university or whatever. And in case of Japanese education system, oftentimes those the examinations or quiz at the school is 100 point is a full mark. So if you are perfect, you will get the 100 point. And say that we have indicated or we provided a 70 point of improvement after our additional analysis. Scientific committee might say, yes, this is enough. What they might say, no, it's not enough. You need to get more points. But they have never indicated us where the line of approval, or it's not approval because they cannot approve, the line they see as passing some acceptable mark. And like I said, there are a group of countries which will not accept any weighting, including sampling by scientific activities. For those countries, even a 100 point perfect answer is not acceptable, because still that engages in the killing of animals. So that's sort of a basic difference or basic difficulty of this organization. Logically speaking, it is very hard, if not impossible, to see the way out. Still, we have been striving and we will be striving that we will try to provide as much scientific information as possible and try to get as higher point as possible in this examination. But this could be a never-ending story, but this has been a never-ending story. Finally, the scientific committee also said there are possibility that our proposed sample size 333 is too small. in one sense, we are surprised that, in a sense, they might be saying that you should catch more whales. But the point is different. Some of the scientists at International Whaling Commission point out many different scientific uncertainties in calculating the sample size. And one of the basics of statistical analysis is if you have more uncertainties, you have to collect more data. So in the case of public poll, in an ideal situation where all the population or nation has exactly the same opinion, you can only ask one person to get the perfect answer, because the rest of the population has exactly the same answer. However, if all the population has totally different idea, how many samples you have to get could be very large. And even if you ask all the people, still the answer might be inconclusive. So if you can add some uncertainties in the scientific discussion, if we are only talking about sample size, the sample size could become bigger and bigger. And some scientists from anti-whaling side provided many uncertainties. And they said that even 10,000 whales are not enough as a sample size. And that's impractical in medicine. So they use this logic to try to prevent Japan to catch animals, because no scientific activities will produce any certain scientific data unless you catch more than 10,000 animals. Well, still that's a scientific possibility. And as a result, scientific committee observed, like I said, there are possibility that the sample size proposed by Japan is too small. I cannot avoid using another example. These days, at our parliamentary discussion, the politicians using too many examples, and the newspapers using that as an interesting story. But anyway, to prove there is some extraterrestrial alien present is actually easy as a method, as long as methodology is concerned. Because if you find out or catch one alien somewhere living on the Earth, that's a proof, very hard proof of extraterrestrial alien existence of an alien. But if you have to prove there are no ETs, that's so difficult. Always there are uncertainties. Even if you search around every corner on the globe, there are still possibility that some ET are living on the Earth or somewhere around the globe. So this issue of too small sample size is similar. Or any other discussion of the scientific committee is quite similar. There are always remaining uncertainties. And that is one of the character of a scientific discussion we are going through at the scientific committee. Well, anyway, that's the main point of scientific committee report. And as I repeating, there are pros and cons almost everywhere, and very inconclusive report. As a final conclusion, which is very ending part of pertinent portion of scientific committee report, which is 17.1.5.1, two paragraphs just above that, there are two dividing opinions again. On one side, those who are opposing whaling said the initiation of research activities is not justified by the additional data on the other side, their view is that enough additional analysis is provided by the Japanese scientists. Therefore, there are no reason to postpone the beginning of research activities, and additional analysis can be done throughout the course of research itself. Interestingly, even some scientists from so-called anti-bullying countries agreed that now it is okay to initiate research activities. So oftentimes, the division of a country or scientific committee is not so clear-cut. You might notice that the scientific committee report, always the subject is not the name of a country, and it's expressed as either some or others or other committees or by individual name. So in the sense that's quite natural that some of the scientists are not bound by the country positions. Technically speaking, I'm not. I don't need to be bound by Japan's position if I will be speaking to the scientific committee meeting. And also the scientific committee observed that additional analysis with or without the initiation of research activities needs continue to be reviewed by the scientific committee, which of course we will respect, and we will continue to provide additional information. From here, our scientists or Japan will try to conduct continued additional analysis. And as you may find from the report of the scientific committee, that they have set out some additional homeworks, and for some of them, they indicated as a guideline that those homework needs to be addressed in coming 3 or 6 months, and for some other aspect, they said those issues or recommendations can be addressed through the course of actual implementation of our research activities. And I'm sure that you will ask a question whether Japan will initiate the research activities from the end of this year or not. And my standing answer is that we will strive to finalize our research plan responding to the latest recommendations and observations from the scientific committee meeting. And there are some recommendations we think we have to complete, and we will, or our scientists will continue to do that. And without finishing those additional analysis, I don't think it's appropriate to say whether we will start the research activity from this winter or not. So I'm sure that you'd like to ask this question over and over again, but my answer will be the same. Okay, this is exactly 30 minutes, and again, thank you very much for joining us today, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morishita. Now we would like to open the floor to questions. We will receive questions from the foreign press, but one question at a time, please. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and if you are selected, please wait for a microphone and give us your name and affiliation before you ask your question. Okay.
Yes, Dennis Normal of Science Magazine. As you know, a group of scientists signed a statement that was included in Annex Q, I think it's called. If I counted correctly, I think 44 scientists from 18 countries. You just said that there are some scientists, even from some of the countries that oppose the Whelan plan, who agree that it's okay to initiate the research activities. Could you give us a list of names of the scientists who support Japan's research whaling plan? Or at least give us some hints as to who they might be.
As far as I remember, at least you can find one or two names if you go through the report of the scientific committee. And
Must have.
one of them, actually, I don't think she will care because she oftentimes makes the same statement, is Dr. Judy Zay from the United States. Judy Zay, Z-E-H, if I remember correctly. And she was at one time the chair of the scientific committee of International Whaling Commission and belongs to I think University of Alaska. And she is always a keen supporter of avoiding the political exchanges at the scientific committee meeting. And there are one or two occasions she took a microphone and said, "Let's talk about science."
During this most recent meeting?
Yes.
Any other questions?
I don't like to put her in a difficult position in the United States, that's why.
Yes.
Kyo Gasegawa with AFP. From your presentation, I got the impression that you're saying that the science committee is not, is discussions not scientific. You're saying that the science committee is too much politicized to discuss science. Are you saying that? If so, can you rephrase that so that we can convey in plain words readers your message? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Actually, the last scientific committee in San Diego was one of the better ones, as long as scientific and technical discussion was concerned. And if I'm not mistaken, for the last 2 or 3 scientific committee meeting, I think there are increasing atmosphere of supporting more scientific discussions rather than be involved in the politics of whale and whaling issue, which is a good sign. But at the same time, there are still some participants who are trying to, or who present their political positions rather than scientific views. So it's not the perfectly scientific yet. That's why Dr. Zay had to take a microphone and ask for a scientific discussion. But in the past, we call bad old days. The scientific committee was, during several years, much more difficult to handle. And oftentimes, just going over one particular scientific issues, there are the attempts of trying to collect as many science names as possible on a working paper. It's like conducting a voting on the scientific aspects. And as if the number of science counts as to the sort of correctness of scientific observations. And if that's the case, someone told me that look at Galileo. Galileo was correct, but at one time he was the only one supporting the theory that the Earth is moving rather than the heaven is moving. So the science is not decided by the number. But there are attempts or attempts sense, we do respect the scientific committee report, and that's the basis for us to continue to address the scientific recommendations issued by the scientific committee.
Any other questions? Yes.
I attended the Friday briefing, and at that one, your stance, while still subtle, seemed to be leaning a bit more towards Japan intends to resume at the end of this year than what you are saying today, which is it's inappropriate to comment until all the analysis is done. Has something changed over the weekend in your stance? I'm just very interested in this difference. Thank you.
Thank you. If you detect some differences, there are no differences. The only difference is I'm speaking English now. And when I speak Japanese, or in between different languages, sometimes the nuance tend to change. For me, English is a more straightforward language and too straight sometimes. And more difficult for me to include enough of a nuance I can usually use in the Japanese presentation. So conclusion is our stance has not changed, and over the weekend nothing happened.
Any other questions?
By the way, I know a person who can speak 3 languages fluently: Russian, English, and Japanese. And actually, her personality changes depending on the language she speaks. It's interesting. But we should be consistent.
No more questions? If there's no more question, yes, please.
I'm not familiar with the matter, and I'm not a scientist myself, so I'm not. I can't present with you a concrete example. But some scientists who are neutral to this issue of whaling say Japan's whaling research seems to be not scientific enough. I thought they cited the number of samples.
Number of publications.
Publications. How do you address that doubt? Thank you.
Yes, this is actually one of the points included International Court of Justice judgment. And they said the number of publicized scientific documents are small as compared to the scale of research activities has been conducted up until that point. And actually, the International Whaling Commission has its own scientific journals, and the Japanese scientists submitted and published, as far as I know, at least 100 and something scientific papers, but somehow ICJ didn't count that as a scientific achievement. And also, our Japanese scientists has been submitting its scientific committee report, the scientific papers to the international scientific journals, and increasingly their submission is denied these days. And the reason is because the data is based on Japan's research activity. And according to their criteria, the killing whale, or the data which was obtained by killing whale, is against ethical code. So they do not accept research result. Of course, this is not cannot be a sort of a sole excuse, but this indicates some of the difficulties that Japanese scientists are facing to issue a scientific documents to publish science magazines. And also, another point is our research activities are not conducted for the publication. And the scientific committee as well as scientific research activities are conducted in order to answer the scientific questions at the International Whaling Commission and its scientific committee. And scientific committee has many scientific questions, and oftentimes, from my view, only conducting the research will provide some insight to way forward. So, bulk of scientific report and outcome is submitted directly to the Scientific Committee of International Whaling Commission. And this is different from general publications like university professors submit for the sake of increasing the number of scientific publications. And our major target is scientific committees. And you will find every scientific committee meeting we have been submitting tens of scientific papers. But these are not peer-reviewed scientific magazines publications. And as a result, the ICJ doesn't accept that as a scientific achievement, unfortunately.
Any other questions? Yes, no.
Yes, Dennis Normal of Science again. This is a little bit aside from the topic of today, but in discussing this issue with an anti-whaling group, which basically agreed that certain species are not endangered, they said that one of their objections to resuming whaling is that the method of taking the whales is very cruel and imposes great suffering on the animal between the time of the first strike and the time it dies. I know that you could not devise a method of taking whales that would satisfy anti-whaling groups, but is there some method that could be employed to lessen the suffering imposed on the animals?
Thank you. In the 80s and the beginning of 90s, if I remember correctly, scientific committee as well as other subcommittees for International Whaling Commission spend a lot of time to talk about so-called killing method. And they come to a conclusion and agreement, actually. And agreement is the most humane way of dispatching animal for whatever purpose is to use explosive harpoon. A harpoon with the powder in its head. And if explosive harpoon is failed, the main recommendation is to use large caliber rifles. And those are exact technology or methodology Japan, Norway, and all other whaling nations are using. So as long as IWC discussion is concerned, our method is IWC certified method. And the result in terms of the data on the dispatchment of animal indicate that very clearly. One of the other discussions that IWC has been engaged is what the definition of humaneness to dispatch animals. And one of the quantitative criteria is TTD, time to death. And the shorter the better, of course. And also the with combination of instantaneous death rate. And the most effective means is again explosive harpoon. And if you go through a schedule, which is a legally binding document of International Whaling Commission, there is actually a provision of prohibition of using cold harpoon. Cold harpoon means harpoon without any explosives. So I know that some of the media says using explosive missile to kill animal and explosion is so cruel. However, at least that was a conclusion by International Whaling Commission. The instantaneous death rate of a coastal whaling oftentimes reaches 80%, 80. And even Antarctic Ocean, where ocean condition is much more difficult, we are approaching now the 50%. And for those who could not be dispatched in the first explosive harpoon, the average time to death is now, I think, around 2 minutes. The again, the anti-whaling articles oftentimes using the exceptional longest time, like hours, and of course there are always exceptions. However, what is important scientifically is the average, and the average has been shrinking. And also another argument we make is that you have to compare these numbers with the other hunting activities of wildlife, like kangaroo hunting in Australia or deer hunting in the UK or United States. And these number of instantaneous death rate of between 50 to 80% and average time to death of around 2 minutes, much better than deer hunting or kangaroo hunting. And that does not mean we will stop improving the method, and we will continue to improve the method. And whaling countries, Norway, Japan, and Iceland, has been engaged in technical discussion for the improvement for a long time. And the report is available on the website of North Atlantic Marine Mammal Commission, NAMCO, including the numbers or data I have just referred. Thank you.
Any other questions? If there's no more questions, I'd like to conclude today's press briefing. Thank you very much, Mr. Morishita.
Thank you very much.